Hello guys, my today's video is about deployments of Azure resources, and I want to talk about how to make deployments more efficient and your deployment projects in Azure DevOps more organized and more efficient. So let's get started. Today's video is about deployment with use of Bicep. And I want to tell you how to use Bicep function loadJsonContent in your deployment of Azure resources. In the documentation to Bicep, you can find a description of this function. You will find the syntax there. You will find description of parameters and usage examples. And I'm going to tell you about a practical example. We'll show you how you can use this function in practice. So let's switch to my project in the Visual Studio Code, where I have prepared for you the Bicep of a logic app. It's a pretty simple logic app, which consists only from an HTTP trigger with a pretty simple schema definition. Yes, we will be using the schema definition in the HTTP trigger. It will be used to define the input data, the structure of input data. It will be the JSON object, of course. And the JSON schema will be used also for validation of the data. So this is my trigger. And the action, it doesn't make sense, but I have just added the HTTP action, which will send the data to a webhook endpoint and the response. I don't need anything more. So what I will do, I'm going to run a command, which will deploy my logic app, taking the Bicep file along with the parameter file. In the parameters section, there is only which is used to define the logic app name and the location. The location is taken from the resource group location. And so in the parameter file, I define the logic app name. It's pretty simple. So I run the command. And let's wait a few seconds. And finally, the resource is provisioned. Let's switch to the Azure portal and we'll check in my resource group. Yes, the logic app is created. And let's go to the details. So the HTTP trigger was provisioned along with schema definition and the HTTP action, which gets this data and sends it to the web endpoint and just responds. So we will focus on the schema and how the Bicep function loadJsonContent can help you in your deployment projects. It's by taking your schema out of the logic app itself, out of definition of your logic app, and storing this schema into an external file, the file which resides outside of the logic app definition. Why? Because first of all, you use the same JSON schema in several places, in several logic apps, and instead of repeating the same schema in each and every logic app, you have only one place where you may change this schema when needed, and this change will be automatically applied to all the places where this schema is used. Another benefit is that it's much more simple to work with a file in the editor, like Visual Studio Code, instead of making changes in this small window open for editing the trigger schema. Let's see first how it works. I turned on the schema validation and I'm going to show you how it works. I'm going to send a simple data. The data consists of 4 attributes: kind, order number, customer number, amount. Let's say it is some log entry or data which is used to log some information. So the kind is log entry. And I run my logic app. You see that the response is sent by the logic app, and the structure is slightly changed. The logic app sends back the accepted data in the response attribute, response element, and this means that the logic app went well. So let's see at running. And this is my JSON schema. These 2 attributes are defined as required: kind and order number. I will show how it works when one of them is not given. So this is the data which was sent to the logic app. And then it's pretty simple. The data was just sent. And then the response took this data and placed it into the response attribute. Nothing complex. Now I'm going to run the same logic app without the kind attribute. And I immediately get an error. Failed to start a run of logic app. The input body for trigger manual of type request did not match its schema definition. And by the way, the error also indicates which particular attribute was not given. Very helpful. And the logic app was not run at all. So you see, there were no runs. This is the result of schema validation. And now I'm going to show you how to set up your deployment project to use external definition of your schema data. And I have prepared a simple schema file. As you can see, this is the same schema definition as is used for now in the HTTP trigger. And by the way, this is the Bicep syntax for the schema, while here I use a pure JSON syntax. And then I have made a little change in the definition of the logic app in my file. First of all, I have introduced the variable schema info, and it's initialized by the result of executing the loadJsonContent function. The JSON content is taken from the file scheme.json. This is the file. It's loaded into the variable, and then instead of using the schema in the HTTP trigger, I just use the variable, and that's it. No more changes is required. And let's see how it will work in the deployment. I'm going to go back to the Azure portal. I can delete the logic app. It is deleted. And then I'm going to run the same Azure CLI command to deploy the logic app. So I switch back to the Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to run the Azure CLI command again. And the deployment is finished. The logic app was successfully deployed. Let's go back to the Azure portal. And as you see, the logic app is in my resource group. Let's check the definition. It should be the same as previously. Yes, we have the HTTP trigger, and this trigger contains the JSON schema. along with the definition of required attributes. It was taken from my schema file. If we take a look to the Bicep function closer and see which parameters it may use, it's not only the file path, it's also the JSON path, which is pretty useful because you may define a single JSON schema file in your project containing multiple different schemas used in everywhere in your project. So as different schemas are stored in different attributes, you have possibility to specify this attribute here as an additional parameter. And of course, you also can define the encoding. So you decide how to use this, but you have seen that one of the benefits is that you have a separate file with the JSON schema, where it's much easier to have control over the content, to edit the file, and then to use it in multiple places. And the multiple places may be not only different logic apps, but of course you have API management service in your Azure integration solution where the logic app works. And there in the API management, you will have to define the JSON schemas for purpose of validation of the input data. And there are several places in the API management service where you should place the definition of the JSON schema. I will show you how it's done in one of my future videos. But for now, let's keep it as simple as possible. You see the point. You drastically simplify your project by using definition in the separate file and reuse it throughout the project. This is all I wanted to show you today. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comments to this video. And see you next time. Goodbye.